Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. George Adamski. See also Gerald Baker. George Adamski Asks Explanations Part 1.
3rd February 1953 Earth. Indeed, Iam Reinhold O. Schmidt does not know that he has never been in this pyramid with the spaceship and the counterfeit utensils, or that it has all only been implanted in him as reality through trickery, and that he has never flown in a spaceship any more than has another Earth human, George Adamski,
who presently deceitfully makes an effort in America to work himself up from hot dog vendor to being famous worldwide as the father of ufology,
as the investigations into our spaceships will already soon be officially called. Certainly, with him, the difference is that he carries out various deceitful manipulations quite consciously, as, for example, through the production of fake photos from spaceship models, and through the manipulation of humans with his extraordinarily high power of suggestion, through which he, like the malicious beings in the Pyramid of Giza, tricks humans with unreal and non-existent things.
Contact Report 002.
You have already spoken multiple times of deceivers and charlatans who have gone public with their fantastic UFO contact stories and still continue to do so. Can you tell me some names?
But the greatest deceiver was the man who called himself Carl Michalek. And the man who gained world fame under the name George Adamski in no way took second place to him. Even his so-called fellow workers or friends belong in the same category. This means those who, together with him, allegedly had contact with us. Contact Report 007. It is, in fact, already enough that certain deceivers like George Adamski and K. Michalek and so on have driven many human beings into delusion and misery. Contact Report 017. Sure, but now to other things that are very important. At the beginning of our contacts, I talked in detail about various fraudsters in beam ships. I spoke by name of George Adamski and his closest friends. In this regard, I have noticed some things in the last weeks that are very unpleasant. I know that at the beginning of our contacts, you sent some material of photos and reports to certain addresses. Since Adamski is exposed in those reports as the biggest cheater, some unpleasant things have resulted. In the last few weeks, various things have been done by various well-known parties to bring this cheater Adamski even more into the public eye as a hero and to present him as the actual father of the UFO contacts. Basically, his closest friends, etc., are cited as witnesses who swore that they had seen and experienced various things with Adamski. But these witnesses have unconsciously fallen into lying and claim things that do not correspond to the truth. George Adamski influenced his friends and acquaintances so suggestively that they saw and experienced things that did not exist. Only very, very few people knew that Adamski had good suggestive powers, which is why they feared him and kept it quiet. But that he was a phenomenal suggester was completely unknown, and of course he himself kept this secret in his favor. By this extraordinarily high suggestive power, he influenced his friends and acquaintances and led them to believe in the most fantastic things, which they then testified in lieu of an oath as truth. Beware of cheaters and charlatans like Adamski was. There are many like him who are already working, and there will be many like him, and all of them will spare no means to make a profit. They lift us up lyingly to perfection beings, which we really are, but not because we are human beings like you, and we are as fallible as you human beings on Earth. Contact Report 029. But especially I would like to talk again about George Adamski, because he made the most tremendous assertions together with Carl Michalek, and because of the excessive number of trick photos, etc., He became more and more audacious and frivolous in the course of the years. Since he saw and recognized that he found great approval in certain circles, and that his photos, etc., were not subjected to too much scrutiny, and therefore were able to deceive real experts, he dared to make even greater claims, namely that he had flown in extraterrestrial spaceships and had been photographed from ship to ship by extraterrestrial life forms. In this regard, I refer specifically to the book Inside the Spaceships, which you kindly gave me earlier to study. In this book, before page 161, there is a photograph of Adamski allegedly taken from a Venusian reconnaissance ship. Here it is stated that in the picture, Adamski is in the early morning hours of 25 in April 1955 on board of a larger spaceship and is standing, together with an extraterrestrial human being, at a viewing hatch. This picture alone is able to convey to every truth-loving and inquiring human being on Earth the fact that Adamski's statements correspond to a pure fantasy, because through the constantly increasing journeys on Earth and the arising carelessness, he has made a spectacular mistake here, which convicts him of deception if it is seriously taken into consideration that the size of the viewing hatch into which Adamski had glued a picture of his head, converted to a scale true to reality, only amounts to just 15 centimeters. This is a very accurate measure, extremely precise and correct. If this measure is now remeasured into the total width of the ship, the length and width of which can be recalculated in the picture, this would result in a total width and total height of the ship of only 171 centimeters and a total length of 897 centimeters, which would correspond to the measures of reality. Adamski, however, had made models which did not exceed a maximum size of 30 centimeters, but were usually only a few centimeters in size, which he mounted on glass panes in front of the optics of his devices and then photographed. In this way, he obtained very deceptive photos, especially when he worked with telescopes and was able to use the moon as a background. He was only able to take various photographs by lining up several panes of glass with pictures, drawings, and self-illuminating dyes, and then photographing the whole thing. He had a friend, who had died in the meantime, make a very good model, made of metal. He also attached this bell-shaped model to a very strong and pierced glass pane and used it for close-ups, etc., which were able to deceive even experts. Adamski was able to cast a spell over worldwide circles through these erroneous machinations. This was made all the easier for him by the corresponding orientation of his being Wesen towards his fellow humans. To a great extent, however, his extraordinarily high ability of suggestion was decisive, enabling him to provoke hallucinations in well-known personalities in various forms. For many years, he was able to influence people with such realistic thinking according to his will and fantasies, and to let them have the conviction that they were actually in contact with extraterrestrial intelligences. In addition to Adamski, there are other charlatans and swindlers of the same kind at work, although their dimensions do not reach his. However, several of them play a very important role and continue to promote untruth.
Contact Report 031.
You know a guy named George Adamski, right?
You know him. You have told me about him several times. I also know him personally from before, when he was at the Volkshaus in Zurich in May 1959. I did not get the best impression of him then, although I had to talk to him with an interpreter because I did not speak English at that time. I noticed, however, that the man was dominated by a tremendous stubbornness and by a great egoism that seemed unusual to me, but which was supposed to be covered up by an almost perfectly acted kindness and charity. I found that the man had an extraordinary gift for persuasion and suggestion and always knew how to take over the conversation. It was clear that he had fallen for an ideal and was exploiting it in his own favor, with a feigned help for the oppressed. So also fighting injustice seemed to me to be only acted by him in everything, only to put himself in the center. It seemed to me that in the first and last place for him, only his own needs were always predominant, and that from the big toe up to the last tip of his hair. I had the impression at the time that in every respect he was only ever concerned with his own ego and his own well-being, which he directed into the highest channels through a tremendous power of imagination and suggestion. He also seemed to me to be dominated by the will to want to be first in every relationship and also to want to take the lead in every relationship.
You have observed and analyzed the man very carefully, which apparently no Earth human being has ever been able to do before. Adamski indeed showed the qualities you mentioned, but he managed to cover them up almost perfectly, and thereby deceived countless human beings. He was born under the sign of Aries and degenerated in a very negative manner. The reason, however, why I am again calling your attention to this man and to parapsychology is this. The space beings you mention do not exist in any form, and they are only the degenerate fantasy product of your impossible parapsychology in the first place. In the second place in this fantasy degeneration functions the aforementioned Adamski. He lived in a hopeless web of lies and was a fantasist with extraordinarily highly developed powers of suggestion. Until a few years ago, your unreal parapsychology partly spoke of space beings of your mentioned form. Adamski took over this form for himself and imaginatively created a special form of being out of them, namely the universe guardians, etc. Neither parapsychology nor Adamski also get to the heart of the truth. Beings of the forms they mention are absolutely non-existent. They have never existed, nor will they ever exist. They are the pure fantasy product of overstimulated, misguided, or sick brains, but on the other hand, they are also implanted fantasy products of the Giza intelligences addicted to world domination. The truth about the most diverse forms of beings rests in completely different values than are claimed by your parapsychology, by Adamski, and various other Earth humans. But these entities have not a single iota in common with the aforementioned fantasy space beings.
But now I would like to come back to the UFO contacts, that is, to those people whom you call swindlers and fraudsters. What I am interested in is this. Under what circumstances do you call these persons guilty of swindling and fraud?
If it is indeed the case that their statements and reports are not true, this is the case if these Earth humans are not in contact with any extraterrestrial life forms and only fabricate their statements and evidence themselves through their imagination and skill, as was the case with Carl Michalek and George Adamski, for example.
So that means that these people are deliberately creating and spreading lies for some reason?
It is so. Fortunately, real swindlers and frauds are few at present. But there will be very many more in the decades to come who lie and are fraudulently false contactees in this respect. That is to say, such Earth humans who, for selfish or world-improving reasons, etc., create lies, swindles, and frauds, have created or will create lies, fraud, and deceit to serve their own or others' egoism, delusion, and profit, like Michalek and Adamski. In a short time, reports will thus also appear in your world press concerning the frauds of George Adamski, who has already been mentioned to you by Ascot as a swindler.
Contact Report 039.
In particular, you did indeed tell me that Adamski was not a contactee.
Contact Report 043.
Narcisco Genovese, Mexico. After Michalek and Adamski, he is the next and biggest deceiver. Minus sign, no contacts, plus Dr. Williamson, USA author. He has certain reservations about Adamski because he was badly fooled by this deceiver. He himself had no contacts, Shaik visual contact.
Contact Report 050.
Does an artificial tunnel system exist under Ecuador, and is a large number of metal foils in the format 96x48 cm there, which are printed with unknown characters?
Underground tunnel systems from the past exist all over the world, including Ecuador. There probably exist foils of the measurement you have referred to, but they were fraudulently made for unfair purposes by Earth humans a number of years ago.
This answer is clear. But what kind of characters are there on these man-made foils?
They were confusingly, but logically, made by a whole group of Earthlings for fraudulent charlatan purposes. But they are truthfully of complete insignificance. Adamski also worked in the same form and also forged such characters for fraudulent purposes.
But now that we are already on Adamski, has he ever seen a beamship before? It has to be like this. Because how else could he have known that these look very similar to the ones he copied in his cardboard and metal models?
He has never seen a beamship, which has been checked and verified by us very carefully. His knowledge leads back to a conversation with a person who was able to describe these forms of flying machines in detail. This person, however, remained silent about their observations to other people, which is why she never became known. It was a woman. Adamski made drawings according to her statements, after which he then copied his other drawings and models, etc., and photographed them fraudulently and spread them all over the world.
Aha! Then is it not the case that Adamski is simply called a cheater because of carelessness or incorrectness?
No, he was a vicious charlatan and cheater of the worst form.
That is very clear again. So there is no excuse whatsoever for him and his actions.
No, he was deceitful in the deepest depths of his yearnings.
Contact Report 057.
But now again a question concerning the dear George Adamski. Has he ever seen a spaceship or a beamship, and are his photos all fakes?
Your question is again illogical, because I have already answered it several times.
I know you said that he never saw a beamship or even a spaceship himself, not even a reconnaissance ship or a telemeter disc. According to your information, he built various models, etc. in the size of approx. 30 cm, with which he then took his photos, based on the statements of a woman who once saw a beamship. But what about his pictures? Are they all deceitful?
Sure, it is undoubtedly so.
Well, you once told me that Adamski was concerned before his death about attesting for posterity that he was a charlatan. According to your information, he would have written this down and signed it personally. Have you now found out where this document is, and is it possible that I can get hold of it?
You have to be patient a little longer, because we still have only a few clues about the person who is keeping the document. But it will certainly be accessible to you within a year.
Contact Report 060 Horst Fenner. You just spoke of persons who call themselves contact persons, but are not really such. Because I have once read several names that I have retained in my memory. One of them was called Adami, or something like that, another one Genovesa, and yet another one Mihalik. Could you tell me something about them? Kohan, the names you mentioned are well known to us, but you mispronounce them. The first is called Adamski, the second, Genovese, and the third, Mihalik. These are not names of real contact persons, but of malicious swindlers. Neither one nor the other of them has ever had contact with us or any of the other space races. To the best of our knowledge, they have also never even sighted one of our beamships. Contact Report 061.
George Adamski, the charlatan and cheater. It is very unfortunate that Jacoby's wife is not convinced of the truth, and blindly trusts in the deceitful machinations of this Adamski of yesteryear. Unfortunately, like very many Earth humans, she attaches much more importance to statements of Earth humans who deceive large masses of people by lying than to our statements, which are always preceded by a close verification. If, then, in such matters as those of Adamski, witnesses who are extremely suggestively influenced and deceived by hallucinations appear, they lose any real overview and blindly trust the fraudulent statements and machinations of the charlatans and fraudsters. With Mrs., not only for the things of us, she does an extensive and valuable job in every direction, but is badly deceived and cheated by various pseudo-contactees, unfortunately. But this can only happen because she is caught too much by the nature of different people, as with Adamski, for example, and then the unconsciously misguided witnesses do the rest.
Contact Report 062.
Further, on my holiday, Ilse von Jacobi also unreasonably reproaches me in a twisted and false manner, whereby she refers to the first book by Adamski as supposedly corresponding to the truth, but that the second one is wrong. Her assertions go so far in her unreasonableness that she begins to assert things that have no truth at all. The reasons for her action in this regard lie on the one hand in the recognition of Adamski's lies and deceits, whose first book also corresponds only to charlatanry and deceit, as does the second.
Contact Report 109.
Excuse the expression, my friend, but this Vorillon is certainly the craziest swindler in matters of alleged contacts with extraterrestrial intelligences. In his order of magnitude, he even surpasses Karl Michalek, Elizabeth Klarer, and George Adamski.
Contact Report 238.
She, Semjase, also explained to you then that it would soon be proven that all those swindlers, liars and cheaters who claim that Venus carries material human or spiritual life would soon be convicted of lying. This proof will now be provided towards the end of this year by the probe you have named, which will also reveal the great fraud of the ore-deceiver George Adamski, who is unfortunately called the father of ufology. Unfortunately, the fact that the truth about Venus is revealed and that there are no forms of life, either material or spiritual, will not dissuade the fanatics, sectarians, and believers from continuing to believe in the swindler Adamski and from defending his great fraud and his lies.
Contact Report 244.
On the other hand, we've known for years that America is home to the worst swindlers, liars, cheaters, and charlatans in terms of UFOs and contacts, and that no one anywhere in the world can even touch them with cold water in this regard. This has already begun with GA and has survived to this day. The fact, however, that those in America who can be accused of real experiences with extraterrestrial intelligences must suffer as a result as well, even if in reality these are only half a handful, does not bother these liars, deceivers, and charlatans, etc., who add everything in order to denigrate the Americans in general. Of course, only the liars, deceivers, and charlatans, etc. can do anything for this disparagement, and these are the deceivers and liars and charlatans, etc., who must also be called such. Unfortunately, swindlers, liars, deceivers, charlatans, and sectarians, etc., are especially marked in America and in large numbers, and probably in no other country on earth do they appear in such masses, and with such impudence as they do in America, regardless of whether they are RB, FB, GA, GG, Medicine Man, or whether they are in the hands of the people of the United States.
Contact Report 269.
In the 57th contact of the 23rd of June 1976, Semjase told me that within a year she would bring me an original document from George Adamski, in which he had admitted that his UFO concerns were only fraud and charlatanry. Sim Ya-se actually brought me a document, but it was only a copy, which I also lost in a strange way. But I never received the original document.
That is correct. Adamski's document actually existed, but it was destroyed by the person who had it in custody because he or she did not want Adamski to be exposed posthumously as a fraud. So our people who were responsible for getting the document could no longer get their hands on it, but had to be content with the photocopy given to you, which, by the way, was stolen from you by H. Jacob when you gave it to him for inspection, and he gave you back an empty folded paper. He did not keep the document himself, but passed it on to that source which we still could not fathom.
Contact Report 299.
Then there is another question that refers to George Adamski. You once told me that he was not a professor at all, as he is still claimed to be.
That is right.
Contact Report 349.
I answer in such a way that, as with Adamski and others, I have personally seen them filming and photographing flying apparatus models suspended from trees and between buildings by thin threads, which should have represented extraterrestrial flying apparatuses, and passing them off as real and publicizing them worldwide.
It was in the late 50s or the beginning of the 60s when this charlatan Adamski gave a show in Zurich at the Volkshaus, Helvetia Platz, with very strange 8mm films and weak, ridiculous-looking explanations. Interested in the show myself, I contacted Ascot, who was present when I attended the Adamski lecture together with Paul Christen and 3 others, of whom I only know their first names, Kurt, Eddie, and probably Eric. So I bought a ticket, saw his films, and listened to his speech, which was translated into German by a translator. For my part, I had borrowed a translator from the extraterrestrial Ascot, who was also present herself, although she remained invisible to all present due to the technology of her light deflection capability, which also deflects and redirects radar beams. Unfortunately, the translators did not do their duty correctly, which disturbed me as well as the audience, who became quite displeased. Unfortunately, I cannot remember many details, because it is more than 40 years ago. But I remember that long before the lecture, Ascot explained to me that Adamski's claims were made from thin air, and that his UFOs were nothing more than models. During the lecture, Ascot and I agreed that I should have a conversation with George Adamski after the film and the explanations were finished, and confront him with the truth of the fact that all his films were made with models, and that his whole story was just his imagination for the purpose of being famous and traveling the world, etc. But since I did not know English at that time, I had to rely on Ascot's translator, which then served me well. Around 23:30 HRs, when the audience had left, I approached Adamski and asked him for a very important personal interview without the audience being present. He agreed to this for 15 minutes as he promised. However, it must be said that Ascot's suggestive impulses were necessary. So we went into a small room, Ascot, of course, going along unnoticed, where I confronted him and accused him of fraud and charlatanry, which he, of course, vehemently denied. So I resorted to the remedy that Ascot had suggested to me, namely that I could prove to him that he could prove the whole of his claims only from his fingers, explaining to him that I myself had been in contact with extraterrestrials since my childhood, and that an extraterrestrial was invisibly present in the room, and that he was not well disposed to his giddiness. He reacted angrily, became loud, and hissed that my words were only nonsense, because there was nothing trivial. Then I asked him how he would behave if Ascot, who had been invisible until then, suddenly appeared in the room. And again he hissed that there could not be such a thing. And that was exactly the moment when Ascot switched off her light redirection device and appeared out of nowhere right in front of Adamski. Pale as chalk and frightened, he opened his eyes and was unable to utter a word. It may have taken him 2, 3, or even 4 minutes to get his bearings, and he stutteringly asked Ascot, dressed in a spacesuit, where she came from and who she was. Of course, she explained the whole context to him, but I cannot remember the details, which led Adamski to apologize to me and explain that I was right with my accusation against him. But he had brought everything up big, and now he could not go back, etc., because otherwise he would make himself impossible all over the world. I do not remember what he said, except that he said that he always felt very alone, and that he had therefore sought the way through the alleged UFOs and contacts with equally alleged extraterrestrials. That in order to get in contact with people who should admire him, to which he also used his strong suggestive powers to cast a spell on people. Finally, we were then more than half an hour in the room when suddenly there was a knocking at the door, whereupon Asket switched on her cloaking device again in a flash and was absolutely invisible. Then a woman came in who wanted to pick Adamski up and asked if we were finally finished, which I answered with yes, after which I left wordlessly and never heard anything from Adamski personally again. Unfortunately, I cannot remember anything more, at least not the exact details of the conversation, neither from myself nor from Adamski or Asket.
Contact Report 561.
The Plejaren never spoke and never speak the untruth. This in contrast to the liars and deceivers George Adamski and Karl Michalek and all the other swindlers, cheats, charlatans and liars who claim the same or similar things as Adamski and Michalek with regard to high life on Venus, no matter whether they lived yesterday, live today, or only tomorrow, and deceive and lie about it. I have seen Venus with my own eyes, and I can say with a clear conscience that all this is true as I have described it, which is why no other life in any higher form is possible on the planet except heat and acid-resistant life.
Contact Report 568.
Although there is only the Earth in the whole solar system, which is inhabited by human beings and many other life forms, Ashtar Command claims that the whole solar system is inhabited. This is scientifically already today a complete nonsense, whereby the whole thing reminds of the charlatanism of Georg Adamski with his human beings from Venus, as well as of Jacob Lorber, who described the huge gas planets as the habitat of human beings, etc.
Contact Report 724.
But what is to be said now concerning Adamski himself can be explained succinctly. Adamski was a swindler beyond compare, whom many followers, devoid of reason and intellect, believed unthinkingly, and still do so today, because they are incapable of getting to the bottom of reality and truth themselves in their obedient faith. The fact is, I know Adamski personally from before, when he was at the Volkshaus in Zurich in May 1959. I did not get the best impression of him then, although I had to talk to him with an interpreter because I was not yet proficient in English at that time. However, I found that the man was dominated by a tremendous obstinacy and by a great egoism that seemed unusual to me, but which was supposed to be covered up by an almost perfectly acted kindness and charity. I found that the man had an extraordinary gift for persuasion and suggestion, and always knew how to draw the conversation to him. It was clear that he had fallen for an ideal and was exploiting it in his own favor with a feigned help for the oppressed. So also fighting injustice seemed to me to be only acted by him, and everything only to put himself in the center. It seemed to me that in the first and last place for him, only his own needs were always predominant, and that from the big toe up to the last tip of his hair. I had the impression at the time that in every respect he was only ever concerned with his own ego and his own well-being, which he directed into the highest channels through a tremendous power of imagination and suggestion. He also seemed to me to be dominated by the will to be in first place in every relationship, and also to want to take the lead in every relationship. Furthermore, I can say today, which unfortunately for certain reasons I was not allowed to do publicly before, that Asket from the Dal universe, on behalf of the Plejaren Svath, was my closest contact person from 1953 for a full 11 years, then afterwards also until 1975. Asket arranged that the two of us beamed into the room reserved for Adamski and suddenly stood before him. He collapsed in fright and could only just sit down on a chair. Askett talked to him and also translated everything I asked him and said that he was telling lies, because he knew very well that his fantasy stories were nothing more than fantasy. Slowly, he regained his composure and admitted that he had lied and cheated, stating that his motive was that he had a great need to be known, as is also the case with actors. He thought that he could use Kenneth Arnold's story as a basis and expand on it in the way he did. Our meeting with him, however, did nothing to make him stop his lies and deception, because he continued in the same style, probably because he was too cowardly to publicly admit his rotten machinations.
Contact Report 727.
This experience of Kenneth Arnold's was fraudulently exploited by George Adamski, who lived in America and came from Poland, by fraudulently claiming with lies that he was in contact with a woman from the planet Venus.